Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Owerri, lived a young woman whose name was Olomachi. She was 29 years old, beautiful, smart, and kind-hearted. However, despite her beauty, she was burdened, not by failure or poverty, but by the fact that her marriages all ended up in disaster. The first one was arrested at their wedding reception. It was embarrassing as the police revealed to her that her husband Bobby was wanted for fraud and identity theft. The name he gave to her was not even his real name, and Olomachi could not believe that she just married a fraudster. What had happened was that the man Olomachi thought she knew had been living a double life. He had been running from the law for over 3 years, moving from city to city, changing his name like clothes. Olomachi had met him at a seminar for young entrepreneurs. He spoke with confidence, passion, and vision. He said he owned several businesses and even showed her pictures, fancy cars, office buildings, foreign trips, which were all fake. Her friends called him Mr. Perfect, and it did not take much for her father to be impressed. He bought her parents gifts and warmed himself up to her father, who loved him like a son. Her mother, however, did not seem to like Bobby. She was quiet around him, unusually observant, and often watched his every move with a certain unease. One evening, whilst Olomachi was in the kitchen, her mother pulled her to the side and said calmly, "My daughter, there's something about this man I can't explain. He's too polished, too perfect. Pray, please just pray." But Olomachi dismissed it. "Mama, you're being too suspicious. He's successful, respectful, and loves me. What else do you want?" Her mother sighed deeply, placing her hand gently on Olomachi's shoulder. "I want you to be safe. I want you to be happy. But most of all, I want you to be wise." Still, Olomachi went ahead with the wedding. But it all came crashing down that same day when the police stormed into the reception and handcuffed Bobby before the guests. The entire event became a scandal. Guests whispered, phones recorded, and within minutes, what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life turned into a nightmare. The name Bobby wasn't even his real name. The businesses he flaunted were all scams. He had duped investors, stolen identities, and was already on the EFCC's radar. Olomachi was so devastated. She locked herself away for months, unable to bear the shame or even leave the house. Her face was splashed across blogs and gossip forums. Her father, too humiliated to speak, withdrew in silence, while her mother, though heartbroken, remained her steady support. A year later, just as the dust was beginning to settle, love came knocking again, or so she thought. This time, it was Emeka, a family friend's cousin, who had recently moved back to Nigeria from the UK. He was charming, well-spoken with an accent that made people listen when he spoke. He claimed to work remotely for a tech firm in London and was ready to settle down. He showed up with flowers, made grand gestures, and treated Olomachi like a queen. Olomachi, still raw from her previous experience, was hesitant at first, but Emeka was so persistent and patient. Her father adored him, and surprisingly, so did her mother. But one thing still gnawed at her mother's spirit. "He's polite," she told Olomachi, "but don't let your guards down too fast. Remember to pray. If he's not from God, ask God to take him away." Olomachi rolled her eyes but nodded. Weeks turned into months, and Emeka proposed. Olomachi agreed to marry him, not knowing that Emeka had the son with another woman. His baby mama was currently pregnant for him again, and Emeka saw no wrong in it. When Olomachi confronted him, he informed her that nothing can come between his baby mama and himself. "She's a part of my life that you cannot erase," he said to Olomachi, who stood there stunned, her heart sinking with every word. "What do you mean I can't erase her?" she asked, her voice trembling. Emeka looked up at her, unbothered. "I mean, she was here before you, and she will always be in my life, whether you like it or not." Olomachi's hand went cold. She felt the walls around her start to close in. "You lied to me, Emeka. You said you want to build a future with me. You said you loved me. You said you wanted to marry me. I said a lot of things, but I never said I was leaving her. That's your assumption, Emeka replied as Olomachi walked out of his apartment that evening, her heart broken. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the realization that she was about to walk down a road even darker than her first marriage. And this time, she had almost walked into it willingly, ignoring the quiet warnings from within. Olomachi was so heartbroken. She broke off the engagement, but not the pattern. For a while, she swore off men. She stayed indoors, avoided events, and threw herself into work. Everyone laughed at her, and this became the beginning of her sorrow. Her mother advised her not to rush into marriage, urging her to pray before accepting any man into her life. But Olomachi saw this as old school. Who prays for a husband in this modern age? She asked her mother, who smiled quietly and said to her that nothing about prayer was old school. Just pray to God to chase away any man that is not for you. She said to Olomachi, who could not hold back her laughter. I should pray to God to chase them to where? To you? She continued to laugh mockingly at her mother, who sat there quietly as she watched her laugh. Olomachi was not willing to heed to her mother's advice. To her, love was about connection and understanding. And so, when the third man came, she welcomed him with open arms. His name was Jidiofor, tall, soft-spoken and understanding. They met in a fancy restaurant, where Olomachi went to have some lunch. Their connection was almost instant, and before she knew it, he was on bended knees asking her to be his wife. Olomachi could not believe her eyes. She was over the moon, as she could not believe that she was finally going to be married after the way her first marriage ended. Olomachi, filled with excitement, approached her mother to share the good news, but her mother did not seem happy with the news. How much do you know about him? She asked Olomachi, who picked offense with her question. Mother, I know him well enough to say yes to his proposal, she replied angrily as she walked out on her mother, not willing to listen to what she had to say. I don't know why this woman never wants to see me happy, she said to herself as she sat in her room extremely angry. She didn't speak to her mother for 2 days, calling her an enemy of progress. By the third day, preparations for the wedding began, and Olomachi could not wait to be married. She convinced her father that Jidiofor was a dream come true, and her father gave her his blessings without any questions. However, this was not the same for her mother, who refused to bless the union. It's not right for you, my daughter, her mother said to her as she cried and begged her not to marry him. But Olomachi's mind was already made up. She got married to Ejiofor, who treated her like a queen. Olomachi could not help but flaunt their love. She believed her mother was wrong and did everything to prove it to her. For the first time in years, Olomachi felt like she was finally living her dreams. However, a few months later, something happened that Olomachi did not see coming. A strange man knocked on her door and requested to see her husband. Olomachi let him into her home as she went up to call her husband, who she found sniffing a strange substance in the room. Olomachi could not believe her eyes. Her husband, the man who she so believed was perfect, was in fact a drug addict. With a shaky voice, she informed him of the visitor downstairs, and Jidiofor went down to meet the man, who pulled out a gun and pointed at his head. Olomachi could not hide her terror. She watched from a distance as the man requested for his money. Olomachi had no idea that her husband was owing the strange man millions of naira, 17 million to be precise. She stood there shaking as the man gave her husband a week to pay the money. Olomachi could not believe what she had gotten herself into. Jidiofor began to sell off their cars and possessions just to pay off the debt that he owed. He even sold her wedding ring to complete the money, and Olomachi was so livid. She confronted him to know why he would do something like that to her, and Jidiofor, instead of being remorseful, turned her into a punching bag. He beat her mercilessly, asking what gave her the effrontery to question his authority. The calm and gentle man she married turned out to be a devil in disguise. Olomachi sat in the corner of the bedroom broken. Her eyes were swollen from tears. Her body ached, not just from the blows that she endured, but from the betrayal that cut deep. Jidiofor, the calm romantic man who who once knelt in a restaurant to propose to her, had now become a stranger that she could not recognize. His temper rising at the slightest provocation. The more of the strange substance he took, the more twisted and paranoid he became. Gideofor sold anything of value he came across. The more addicted he became, the more he sold to fuel his addiction. Their generator, television set, and even the gas cooker disappeared one evening when she arrived home from work to find her husband slouched on the floor asleep. He was high and did not know when she arrived from work. Olomachi had no idea what she was going to do. She could not go back to her mother, not after all her mockery and stubbornness. She could not face the shame again, the shame of a failed marriage, not after her first husband was arrested on the altar. Olomachi decided to endure the torture of a marriage that she found herself. She endured each day, using makeup to cover up the bruises that her husband gave to her. One evening, Olomachi returned home from work in her colleague's car. Her husband flared up in anger, accusing her of cheating on him. "How dare you bring your boyfriend to the front of my house?" he asked her angrily as he slapped her hard across the face. "You think he's better than me? You think you are better than me?" he said angrily as he held out a substance in his hand and forced her to take it in. Olomachi struggled, refusing to let the substance close to her nose, but Gideofor grabbed her chin angrily and poured the substance in her nostrils. Then he held her mouth shut, forcing her to sniff in the substance. The scent burned her lungs like acid, and within seconds, the entire world spun like a carousel as Olomachi fell to the ground unconscious. Gideofor stood over her body as he began to breathe heavily. For a brief moment, reality slipped through the cracks of his clouded mind. He stared down at Olomachi, who lay there motionless, but instead of calling out for help or rushing her to the nearest hospital, he reached for his stash and began to sniff. The stiffness in the room screamed louder than his own thoughts, so he took more and more of the substance, more than he had ever taken in his life. His hand shook as he inhaled the harsh substance. His eyes rolled to the back as he dropped to the floor beside her. The entire room went silent as the clock ticked away. The neighbors could finally sleep after all the banging and shouting. By morning, the house cleaner arrived to clean the house and met them on the floor unconscious. She rushed them to the hospital, where it was confirmed that Olomachi was now in a coma. Her husband Gideofor did not make it as he overdosed on the substance. Her mother caught wind of the information and rushed to the hospital. She arrived at the hospital breathless as she watched her daughter hooked to the machines. Her heart broke to see her daughter in such a way. She wondered what could have happened and prayed to God to save her life. Weeks passed and Olomachi remained unconscious in the hospital. The doctors did all they could to revive her, but Olomachi remained in coma for weeks. They explained that she had slipped into a drug-induced coma, and while her vitals were stable, her brain activity was unpredictable. Her mother refused to leave the hospital. Every day, she brought food for the nurses just to stay close to her daughter. She prayed like never before, pleading with God to save her daughter's life. And one night, nearly 6 weeks after admission, Olomachi regained her consciousness. She saw her mother sitting next to her and could not believe that she had been in the hospital for 6 weeks. Her mother leapt for joy to see her awake. She called on the doctors, who all rushed to her side to check on her. Olomachi was still weak. Her eyes were open, but she was too weak to lift herself out of the bed. Her mother could not stop thanking God for saving her life. Tears rolled down Olomachi's cheeks as she struggled to speak. "Mama, I should have listened to you," she said to her mother, who told her to focus on healing. "We'll talk when you're stronger," she said to Olomachi, who lay there in regret. Her husband was now dead, and Olomachi could not believe that she was now a widow. Days passed, and the doctors finally discharged her from the hospital. Her husband had already been buried by his family, and Olomachi could not believe how her life had turned out. She no longer cared about what the world would say. All the gossips meant nothing to her, not after she stayed in an abusive marriage, all because of her fear of what people would say. Her life almost ended because of this, and Olomachi was not willing to repeat her mistakes. She believed so much in marriage, but realized that she was doing marriage the wrong way. So, she decided to adhere to her mother's advice, praying to God to chase away any man who was not from him. Olomachi was no longer desperate for marriage. She was desperate for peace as well as a happy life. And just like her mother had said all those years ago, God began to answer her prayers. So many men came into her life, but Olomachi did not just accept them. She took each one to her knees in prayer. Lord, she whispered, if this one is not from you, chase him far away. I no longer trust my eyes. I trust your voice. And truly they began to flee. One man, charming and wealthy, disappeared after 3 weeks, exposed for lying about his previous marriage and children. Another, who seemed respectful and romantic, stormed off angrily one day when she asked him to join her in prayer. He never called again. Another confessed he only wanted her for business purposes. Each time, Olomachi would smile and whisper, thank you, Lord. Keep chasing them away. She became known in her church as the graceful one, quiet, kind, prayerful, and stronger than ever. She no longer apologized for her standards. She no longer bent her boundaries. She had scars, yes, but now she wore them like a warrior. And then he came. His name was Tobena, and he did not arrive with fancy clothes or loud declarations. He did not rush her or bombard her with compliments. He was calm, patient, kind. He saw her scars and did not flinch. He listened to her story and admired her strength. He prayed with her, fasted with her, and most of all, he never pressured her into anything. Olomachi watched him closely, like a woman who had once touched fire and knew how to detect heat before it burned. She prayed harder than ever before. God, if he's not from you, chase him away too. But Tobena remained. Week after week, month after month, Tobena did not vanish. He did not break. He did not change. Rather, he stayed. He introduced her to his family and asked for her mother's blessings, which she gave with a smile. For the first time, her mother smiled and said to her that she had peace, and Olomachi could not help but cry. Not because she was afraid this time, but because for the first time in her life, she too felt peace instead of pressure. She got married to Tobena and deep down knew that the marriage was blessed by God. This time, Olomachi was not marrying out of desperation or fear of judgment. She was not chasing a fantasy or proving a point to anyone. This time, she was stepping into destiny. As Tobena slid the ring onto her finger, he whispered a short prayer over her hand. Tobena prayed for peace and love in their marriage, and just like that, Olomachi found love after the storm. She spent her days not shouting her love from the rooftops, but quietly living it with a man who loved her despite her scars. And every morning, she thanked God for chasing the wrong ones away. The lesson to be learned from this story is that no matter how desperate we are to find love or prove ourselves, rushing into relationships without divine direction can lead to deep regret, pain, or even destruction. Olomachi's story teaches us that marriage is not a race to the altar, but a journey of discernment, wisdom, and trust in God's timing. When we surrender our desires and ego and allow God to filter the people who come into our lives, we save ourselves from unnecessary heartbreak. True love is not found through pressure or appearances, but through peace, prayer, and purpose. Sometimes, the greatest miracles is not in who comes into our life, but in who God chases away. I hope you enjoyed the story.